Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ty, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Making the Right Hire, How to Assess Candidates for Job Fit in Your Organization. This event is being presented by HR Morning and sponsored by eSkill. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the control panel. If they're regarding the subject being presented, I'll add them to the queue for questions at the end. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker, Kelly Painter.
Thanks, Ty. Good morning, everyone. Hope you have your coffee and you're ready to listen to some great information that I've put together this morning. Just a little bit about myself. I have been in the talent management space for about almost 20 years now. I hate to even choke that out. But just in working with behavioral assessments, skills testing, leadership development, coaching, putting in selection processes, coaching and development processes, and I've implemented solutions in hundreds of different clients, from as small as one-person consulting organizations to as large as 500,000 employees for leadership development. So I do have some experience, but as we have all seen in the last couple of years, things change. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, is understanding what things have changed and how can we approach the selection process, as well as coaching, development, and training processes a little bit differently than we've been accustomed to. Obviously, we have a talent shortage, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and then go into what are some of the tools that you can use. All right. So sit back and we'll get started. So today's agenda, I did a little bit of research around what people are talking about and what are some of the recent trends. So we'll start with just covering some of those things. I found a lot of it very interesting myself, so I thought I'd share with you today. Any of the content that was found on specific websites like Harvard Business Review or HR Frontline, a couple of SHRM sites, I put those in the footers of the PowerPoint slides, so you'll have those available to you as well. I want to talk a little bit about behavioral versus skills testing, what the differences are, what are typically the things that we would measure when we put a process together. Third, we want to make sure that we understand, how would we use any of these tools for screening candidates, and what could be the impact on the business if we implement any tool in the selection process, or for coaching, onboarding, employee development, or training. Okay. Also, we want to take a look at preparing for the use of assessments during selection. So when we put a process together, then what? Right? How do we check on it? How, what are the things that we're looking for? How do we identify a good test? And then the last thing is definitely protecting your organization. We don't want to just kind of put a process together and leave it. We always want to check it. Is it performing the way we want it to? Is it telling us the information that we need to know about these candidates to help us make better people decisions? Is it meeting all of the Department of Labor requirements? Is there any adverse impact? So we don't just leave it. And then ultimately, as we found over the last few years, is did the job change? The requirements that we put in place 2 years ago may not have any relevance to the current job as it sits today because of the changes. It might have gone remote. It might have taken on additional responsibilities. So we want to make sure that we protect the organization by ensuring that we look at information that is relevant for the job at that time. Okay, so let's start with some of the research that we took a look at. So one of the best articles that I read was The World of Work. It's changing with skill-based hiring. There was a trend starting back in 2016, 2017 with skill-based hiring. There was an upward tick, and then of course COVID came along, and then we really had to start looking at, okay, where is the talent, and what kind of skills do they have, and what do we look for to bring them in? What that did was it created a wider talent pool. Okay, because we took the degree requirements away in some of these jobs that didn't necessarily need a degree. We took those requirements away, and we actually widened that talent pool that we could select from. It accelerated the time to hire because we weren't confirming education, we weren't confirming certifications, we weren't confirming additional components that were listed as requirements. So that in turn reduced costs. And one of the most interesting things that I read in this study, and again, this study is outlined in the footer information, is that individuals without a 4-year college degree tend to stay about 34% longer than their peers with degrees, right? It might be that individuals with a 4-year degree are looking for upward mobility, and individuals without a 4-year degree are looking for stability and long-term career. And so it just might be a difference of approach, but it was just an interesting fact in that study that came out. And then the last thing I thought was really interesting was you have a greater diversity potential, because when you have degree requirements, you have to remember you have about 60% of the population in the US over the age of 25 does not have a 4-year degree. So that is one of the other things that changing the way that you hire, and you're hiring for specific skills, may change the way that you approach the candidate pool. Right, so very interesting there. We went on to take a look at some additional information at Harvard Business Review, a study that was just released. They looked at all of the job postings across various industries, across different companies, some of the largest tech companies to some industrial companies, manufacturing. So they see that, obviously the demand for talent is far outreaching the supply. And oftentimes people say, oh, I don't have anybody that meet the requirements of my job. It's not to mean that there aren't people out there who can't do the job. It's just they don't meet the minimum requirements that you've set. So employers started de-emphasizing degrees. So 46% of middle skill positions required no degree, and that was a shift. All right, and then 31% of high skill positions required no degree. Again, a shift. So organizations are taking those requirements that might be barriers to finding talent off of the job description and off of the position requirements, and opening up that talent pool, right? And so when they start to hire for demonstrated skills, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a few minutes. But when they talk about more of the demonstrated skill, what are the basic minimum skills for you to step into the job on day one, so we can begin to acclimate you to the job and teach you the specifics about how to get this job done, right? Employers who eliminated degree requirements frequently added more soft skills. That means that teamwork was more important. The way that they approach work was more important. Are they fast-paced? Are they multitaskers? How do they learn new information? Those things became more important because having a specific degree requirement and education behind them, or a certain amount of experience, may have negated that individual from applying for this job. But if they have the right behaviors that they can approach the job and be successful, that changes everything, right? And then there was a couple of just informational items that were highlighted in these articles, and so I added them here. Is that there has been a trend over time that degrees don't necessarily predict performance, right? So the bottom statement there, previous research suggests that performance differences, degree versus non-degree, are often marginal, except for professional services. If I'm an attorney, or if I'm a doctor, these individuals require certain levels of education, right? So we're talking about specific jobs like sales may not require a degree, okay, depending on what kind of sales it is. There are other positions in customer service. I see a lot of job descriptions today, and guys, I look at hundreds of job descriptions almost daily. They all require degrees and certain levels of education for entry-level positions, or a job that pays $13 an hour, $15 an hour, requiring a degree. And so you very much are limiting the candidate pool when you put those kinds of requirements into those roles. All right, so as a result of the changes in the economy, the changes in the demand for talent, of course, COVID has changed so many things, and that could be a whole webinar in itself, right? About the mindset of the worker and where they want to work from, and where they choose to work for somebody who has a more flexible schedule or allows them to continue to work from home. So this reset has actually created stronger equity in the job market. So when you take that degree, remember that number, 62% of individuals over the age of 25 don't have degrees. So when you remove that requirement, you open up that talent pool, but you also make the talent pool a little bit more equitable in the job market, right? And then we look for talent in new places. I see a lot of organizations looking for high school graduates because they don't need a college education to fill those roles, and they can put somebody in an in-house training program, right? Removes those barriers. and then allows more emphasis on soft skills. Okay, real performance. I've used behavioral assessments again for 20 years, and the performance is generally indicated by specific behaviors with individuals, especially, I mean, it's very clear in sales, a combination of behaviors in any organization lends itself to understanding what really predicts success in those roles, right? And we have an easy measure by just looking at, how much did somebody sell and how many new clients did they have? It's a little bit easier than looking at a manager or a leader delivering results because there's more moving parts and it's a less direct measure. Okay, so in understanding and looking at all of these trends and looking at the recent studies, you can see that this new skill-based hiring trend is actually leading to a more equitable market and also a larger candidate pool. So what are these skills? All right, skills are demonstratable. Okay, I can demonstrate them. I have a knowledge. I can answer questions related to them. It will improve with training. I often get clients who come in who are asking for me to measure teamwork, right? Well, there are behaviors that feed into the demonstration of good teamwork, right? I can test someone's knowledge of what are the present scenarios, situational judgment questions, and have them respond to them, but that doesn't lend itself to the behavior that drives that teamwork. Right, so skills are demonstratable, they are a demonstration of knowledge, and they improve with training. Those are the key factors. That includes abilities, aptitudes, situational judgment, which I absolutely love situational judgment questions because it allows us to ask someone to think through a scenario. All right, there's a specific scenario, think through it, what is the best answer? Okay, and it just shows you how do they reason? How do they problem solve? How do they understand what's going on, and can they articulate, what is the best step forward, right? And oftentimes their response is based on their limited experience or their just lack of understanding. So it's a good conversation point too as you onboard someone. And of course, job simulations we all love, right? We want somebody to be able to demonstrate that they have a specific skill. Not that they can use your specific software, but the skills that would enable them to navigate any kind of software. Do they have a general knowledge of how components work or how to operate within a computer? Until I started working with call centers, I didn't understand that not everybody knows how to work on a computer, right? And it was a reality check is understanding that there are some people who don't know how to navigate a desktop, don't know how to open folders and save documents and operate within Excel. Right? I have college graduates in my family that didn't know how to navigate Excel as well as I had taught myself. And so that's one of the things that we want to make sure that when we're evaluating candidates, that we do have them demonstrate the specific skills they need, again, to walk in the job on day one. Okay, so there are lots of companies who tell us on a daily basis, I can't find talent. Okay, now I bring up this quote from 2014 because it was interesting. Like, technology changes all the time. We at eSkill, we have an enormous library of content, and we're always being asked for this new latest and greatest technology. Like, do you have this? And number one, sometimes it's not even listed on the ONET, which is what really drives our content. What are the specific skills that are being recruited for as reported by Department of Labor? So when it's not even on that site yet, then we're trying to understand, like, how widely is this specific software being used or the software language being used? So oftentimes it's difficult to keep up, but we have a great content team that keeps up with all of the latest, greatest technology. So we utilize that. But I thought that quote was very interesting in that, it's 8 years old already, but it's still relevant today. Technology is just changing, and it's changing at a faster pace. So what do you do when you have technology that is changing constantly, right? There is also, again, a whole nother webinar that we could talk about agility in the workforce. And that is going to be the number one thing going forward, is looking at your workforce from the lens of agility. Do you have a workforce that is agile? So if you find people with the right behaviors, you find people with the capacity to learn new skills, all right, and you create programs for on-the-job training, that's how you can build that workforce, right? You can start to look at what are the skills that they currently have, what could we teach them, can they learn new skills? And we can create environments where they have the ability to do that. and not for, this is another thing that we're starting to see as well, is opening up learning to everyone rather than designated high potentials or designated people who are on the leadership track, or those individual contributors love taking in, if they're good learners and they like learning, they will love taking in new information, learning new skills. So we want to give them those opportunities, and you can do that in-house as well. All right. I always encourage my clients to look internally as well as externally for new candidates. You just never know when you have an individual who is in the organization already that would like to learn those new skills and would like to take on new responsibility. You always want to look internally, and you can keep them engaged that way. Okay. And some people say, oh, I'd never take that person out of the job because they do it so well and they would be hard to replace. Well, maybe you add a couple of extra responsibilities and give them a little bit of room to stretch and grow, and it will keep them engaged. Okay. All right. So just a few ideas there. Now, what is a good test? Well, a good test is number one, single most relevant thing about a test is make sure that it is relevant to your job, right? That's number one. If you get a standard off-the-shelf test because you think that it is valid for an administrative assistant, because it says administrative assistant, right? That doesn't mean that it is relevant to your administrative assistant position. That's why at eSkill we allow you to customize those tests. We give you the baseline, but sometimes there are certain aspects of an administrative assistant position that are not required for your job in your organization, right? So just make sure that the test is job relevant. That's number one. Number two is there's examples of all kinds of different things that you can test for, all right? At eSkill we have over 500 different subjects. So examples are like typing in Microsoft Office, basic math, measurements, safety, multitasking, job simulations, the things that we've talked about earlier. We want to make sure it's job relevant, but then we want to make sure it measures consistently. It measures what it's claiming to measure. Okay, if I think somebody's taking a typing test, but the results come back and it shows me that they have answered questions regarding customer service, well, then that typing test is not actually measuring typing now, is it? Okay, so that's what it means. Just make sure it's measuring what it claims to measure, all right, and it measures it consistently. All right, all we're looking for is give me some basic information about your candidate, and we get that information, and then we're able to make a better decision about whether they're going to be a good fit for this specific job. The last thing you want to do is bring somebody into a role, and I say this over and over and over to clients, don't bring somebody into a role only to set them up to fail, right? We want to make sure they have the basic skills to walk in the door and be able to start that job, right? If you have somebody who walks in the door and they have no skills, let's say I'm hiring for a receptionist who has to type and maybe has to do some medical coding or has to do some transcription. So they have to know how to type. But I hire somebody who has no idea how to type and just starts typing with 2 fingers. So what does that do to that person after about 3 to 5 days when they realize that typing is a core piece of this role and they don't know how to do that? It starts to create stress, and we don't want to set somebody up like that. So we want to make sure that they have the basic skills to walk in the door, and that's what skills testing is. Demonstrate that you have this specific skill that is required for you to start this job. Okay? All right. So what is the business impact? So it's like, well, I've implemented skills testing, and what can it do for me? All right. I have post-hire on the left-hand side because this is where we see real results in organizations when you use skills testing. Okay, now you'll see there I have skills testing directly predict success in the first 90 to 180 days. It could be as early as 30 days, but the reason I say that over and over is because when somebody gets on the job and they've been there 2 years, you don't know what they knew when they walked in the door, and you don't know what they learned on the job. So if I try to test somebody who 2 years out, they could have learned some of these skills on the job because they're doing them every day and they got really good at them, right? So I want to know whether this person can step into the job and learn the job. So the metrics that we typically track for our clients are, did they complete training? Number one. Number two is what were their training scores? I will compare their skills testing scores, the things that we tested them for, in comparison to their training outcomes, right? Do they correlate? Third thing is time to productivity. If they have all the basic skills, I know they're going to be able to get into the job and do the job really well, right? So their time to productivity is cut because they came in with the skills that they needed. Remember my receptionist, if she didn't know how to type and she had to teach herself how to type, her time to productivity is probably going to be very much extended because she's got to learn how to type before she can learn the job, okay? Then it improves training outcomes. All right, we just had a client do a case study for us, and she reported that before she started skills testing, she had about a 78% graduation rate in their onboarding training cycle. And then after using skills testing, just to get those baseline skills, it's not a massive skills test. I think it has less than 20 questions on it. She improved graduation rates to 90%. All right, so they don't have that churn that they used to have. All right, and then really when we start to look at training too, is if somebody is not doing didn't test well in the beginning, it's not that we screen them out, but we might have put them in a different training class to start with. So we have clients who say, no, Kelly, I just need a warm body. All right, so then we say, okay, well, let's test them. And then we can figure out where we need to really focus their training because they have some areas that might create a challenge. Again, we want that time to productivity to be sped up as much as possible. Bring them in with the basic skills, enhance their skills if needed, and put them into the job. All right, on the pre-hire side, we just try to speed up everything. All right, our time to hire improves because we know we're only dealing with the people who have the basic skills needed to start the job. All right, we improve candidate engagement because we get them back faster. We have them do this. They get immediate feedback in some cases, depending on what the process is that we put in place for them. We do have quite a few candidates who self-select out of the process. And for some of you in HR, that might just be like horrifying that somebody would do that. But I always talk to my clients about these individuals who might decide that they don't want to take a test. When they get into the role, what are they going to decide they don't want to do? Especially if you make it as simple as possible. If it's a 5 to 10 minute test and they feel like they can't take it or won't take it, then at least it warrants a conversation, right? All right, and then we get to focus on those candidates who are appropriate for the role. Okay, so your checklist when you go to look for any kind of skills testing is, again, job relevant, number one. Number two, we take a look at make sure it complies with best practices, all right? What are our best practices for utilizing skills for selection? We wanna make sure the content is authored by subject matter experts, all right? We use them, we have a ton of resources that we use for subject matter experts, and we also get all of our content peer reviewed. But those are really key elements. We want to make sure that if somebody develops a test, that somebody else looks at it and confirms, yeah, it is measuring what we say it's going to measure. The difficulty levels are appropriate for the kinds of jobs that we would be using this for. Right? We want to make sure it's valid for the role and it is a reliable test retest situation. Okay. All right, now let's talk about behavioral assessments. Now, behavioral assessments are a little bit different. Okay, when we're talking about long-term performance in a job, that's where your behavioral assessments come in, right? Skills testing is short-term. What skills did you have when you came to the table, right? Behavioral assessments are all about how you approach work, right? How do you communicate? How do you work with a team? How do you approach your work? Are you a procrastinator or are you a planner, right? Do you like to take direction or give direction? Okay, these are the things that behavioral assessments tell us. You cannot fail a behavioral assessment. You can't. All right, it just tells us as employers more information about your candidate that you don't know, that you would know after being around them for 2 to 3 months. So this is a shortcut to help you understand how does this a person going to approach work, and does that look similar to the individuals who are successful in this role? Okay, so this is what a behavioral assessment is. There are some people who have a preconceived notion that a behavioral assessment is bad and it doesn't work, and it's all about the application. Behavioral assessments would not be available in the job market or in this industry without being a reliable and valid assessment. It's all about the application of the assessment and how it's being used. So these are really, really key elements about understanding how well someone's going to perform over time. Okay. All right, so we look at how they work in environment, what they're interested in, which is very much a key element, and how they learn new information. All right, typically this is what I use. These three elements give me kind of a complete picture of how someone will fit into the role. How do they work in the environment? What are they really motivated by? And how do they learn new information? All right, and I have down here, think agility. Okay, remember is how someone processes information and how they learn. Really the organization, the manager, the department, they all have to know how these individuals are communicating and how they process that information. Because if you have an entire group of individuals that need more time to process information, but you're feeding them with a fire hose, that agility will go out the window because they're really not understanding how the organization's changing and moving forward. So that reasoning assessment is really critical to understanding how do I train someone, how do I communicate with them, and how do I get them to make changes or to learn these new concepts and ideas to drive the organization forward. Okay. All right. So what are the characteristics that are most important? Just examples over on the left-hand side are extroversion, assertiveness, conformity, stability, openness, grit, integrity, work ethic. I mean, there's all kinds of characteristics out there that you can measure. Some assessments have multiple characteristics and you can customize it. Some assessments have static characteristics that are generally accepted across any job, any industry, any level. So it's just a matter of what does the candidate pool look like? What is the best assessment tool for your process? I mean, any assessment tool from a behavioral standpoint could be used in just about any job, but it's all about what your process is. If you want to lock in a certain amount of behavioral traits and have it consistent throughout the organization, it's a wonderful thing to have because everyone kind of gets on the same page of the same language for those behaviors. They understand what they mean, and they know what it means relevant to the job and workplace. Okay, now how do I know which traits are important for which jobs? The best way is completely contrast to skills testing. In behavioral assessments, we want to take a look at people who are doing well in the job and understand how they're different than people who struggle in that job. All right, those differences help us understand what are the key elements that really support success in that environment. And I say in that environment because it is really critical for you to understand that when you take a salesperson, just as an example, from one organization and you take them straight over to a competitor, right? Some of you are trying to recruit from your competitors because a superstar salesperson over at this company will bring them over, they'll bring over their clients, they're really great, except the environment just changed. So unless you can say our managers are just like their managers and our support system is just like their support system, it's going to be very difficult for that salesperson to transition because that person's behaviors were perfect for the other organization. That's why that person did really well. All right. But I bring them into a different environment where maybe there's not any resources. Then I start to have some trouble, right? Because he doesn't have, a sales support person. He has to do all the work himself. He doesn't have somebody prospecting for him or her. So the environment changes. And so we want to make sure we understand in that role, in this organization, who is doing this really well and who is struggling. And then that can help us understand why. All right. I basically got ahead of myself without switching the slide. So it doesn't matter which behaviors are measured. Yes. And it's not consistent across the board. All right. There was a Harvard Business Review study that was published that looked at top performing salespeople that moved from one organization to another. And typically, I think it was over 80% of them failed at the new organization because they didn't have the skills and the behaviors that were needed in that environment. Things changed. All right, managers changed, infrastructure changed, support changed, and they weren't as successful as they were in their original organization. There was very few of those top performing salespeople that were able to move from one organization, same industry, direct competitors, same kind of client, different environment for them to operate in. Okay, so behaviors were definitely a key element there. Okay, so when can you use a behavioral assessment? Pretty much any time during the employee life cycle. All right, you can screen with it. Onboarding and coaching Those are critical areas for a manager to understand who's my new person. It's like your playbook for your new person. It's understanding how do they operate. Are they very similar to the people who are successful, or do they have a behavior that might be a little bit different that we need to help them with? All right. When we start to look at development, I'm sure as HR people, you have all seen where somebody has been promoted because they did a fantastic job in their current role. And then we move them into a manager role and they didn't do as well. One, we didn't prepare them. Two, we didn't understand if they have the right temperament to deliver at that level. All right. There are some individual contributors that need to be supported and grow as individual contributors. They can manage process all day, but they shouldn't be managing people. There are other people who are not your rainmakers that can manage people very effectively, and we want to identify those folks. Behavioral assessments can help you do that. And there are some really great behavioral assessments out there that help you do career planning and are able to designate for an individual all of the different kinds of jobs and job families that they would be good at, and provide them good structure and a good plan for going forward. You can do that internally at some organizations depending on the behavioral assessment that you use. But it does help you understand, how do I develop certain areas? How do I adapt behavior so I can be a good leader in the organization coming forward? All right, so the business impact of behavioral assessments. You can improve sales, that's an easy one, right? We hire more people that look just like your top performing salespeople from a behavioral standpoint. You have a better likelihood of success there. Improve customer service scores. We see that as a metric that is very common, customer service scores across the board when you look at people who have the right temperament to be in those roles. Right? You improve retention. If you put a person in a job that they can naturally be good at without having to change everything about themselves to be good at it. I'm sure all of you remember at a time whenever you've seen an employee just completely stressed out because they're trying to do a job and they're trying to fit into a job that they're just not equipped to do. It improves engagement, understands the bench strength, succession planning. Remember about like 8 years, 10 years ago, maybe some of you don't remember, but everybody talked about succession planning because all of the baby boomers were retiring, right? And who was going to replace them? And we have a much smaller working population, and now even smaller working population in the younger generation. So we still have to position ourselves for succession planning and who is going to be our next round of leaders, and who's going to be around to be your next round of leaders, all right? And then identifying those career paths for your employees and then improving training outcomes. Okay, now, how do we get to using these kinds of tools to help build your process? Well, first of all, this last section that we'll talk about today is just understanding what goes into building out your selection process. Number one is know your business. Okay, it doesn't happen very often, but there are often times I get HR folks are changing jobs all the time now, right? They're leaving one job, they're going to a new job. Know and understand the business that your company is in. That's first and foremost. Know what they do, know who your customer is, know how they interact with your organization. How does the sales cycle work? How do the leaders work? How are they very hands-on, or is everybody remote? Is it a very flat organization? How do things happen internally, right? Know your business and then understand your culture. Right? Does everybody come in at 4 a.m. and leave at 8 p.m. because they're all single and really they're workaholics, right? Or is it most people come in around 9, they leave around 2, they work part-time from home, part-time at the office, things like that. Understand what the culture is because you have to know what you're looking for. Right? You need to know when you get somebody in for an interview, what are you looking for? And then what are the benefits of working for your company? It's interesting when I asked individuals to describe the true benefits and they start talking about 401k plans and healthcare, and yeah, those are all great benefits, but what are the real benefits for working for your organization? All right, there's a lot of people out there, especially after COVID and seeing, what can happen in the blink of an eye to the world, the economy, their jobs, things like that. They want to know what is the benefit for working for your company. So are you helping people? Do you guide people? What is the benefit for working for your company? Key element there. All right, second, we go to the department level. Understand what kind of person works best with this manager, okay? I think sometimes that this is really overlooked. Managers like to set the environment that they work in, right? So they have specific kinds of people. Because of the way they work, they get along with well with certain kinds of people that work in similar situations in a similar way. Okay, so understand what kind of person works best with that manager. Some of the HR teams that I work with are really good at that, and it's impressive to watch. So kudos to you if you understand this. Describe the environment to yourself. All right, what is the department like? What are the key performance indicators? How is this team measured? Okay, is it very detailed? Like, do we track the number of calls made by each person on the team every day? If I have somebody who doesn't like to be micromanaged, going into a team that has metrics tracked by the day or by the hour, it may be a tough fit. Okay, is there an issue with the talent retention, engagement, training, communication within this group? What's going on with the group? Is somebody walking into, an entire group of disengaged individuals, or is somebody walking into a well-oiled team and a team that really gets along? So we want to make sure that it's critical that this person that we're adding is going to be a good fit for that team. And then, has productivity of this group changed, or have their job duties changed recently? Okay, sometimes when a team is in flux and a constant, change, then it can really impact their ability to be productive, which creates stress. Okay, especially given whatever their key performance indicators are. Right. All right, and finally, we do the formal job analysis. Right, the job analysis overall just helps us understand what are the duties and the nature of the job, and identify the kinds of people that we should hire. Okay, from the job analysis, your takeaways are what skills are needed on day one, not what skills that your person that has been working in the job 10 years has, but what skills are needed if I bring a new person on for them to be able to be set up for success in that role. Second is what is required, what is the required learning curve? Okay, there are some jobs that have 4 to 6 weeks of training because there's a lot of information that somebody has to know, or they might have to become an insurance agent and take a certification test, or it might be a one-day, here is a manual, please learn the manual, and you get started tomorrow morning. Okay, so understand what the learning curve is and make sure that your your new employee has the capacity to do that. And then last is, what are the behaviors needed for long-term success? All right, so once your skills kick in and you learn the job, then what are the behaviors that really drive success with the rest of the team and how you approach work? That's where the behaviors come in. And most critically important is, what are the 3 outcomes that you would need to see for this person to be deemed successful? Super simple, but nobody talks about it. It's not on almost any job description. I was working with an individual consultant for the last 5 years now, and this is one of his big critical moments in his discussions with his clients is, what are the 3 outcomes needed to be achieved by this candidate for you to say this is a successful hire? All right, and you might post that on the job description, is these are the things that you're going to have to do. These are the things that you're going to be measured by. And so people clearly understand what the role is and what they'll be measured by. All right. Some people don't talk about the outcomes of this individual to deliver results. Okay, but ultimately that's what they'll be judged on. And remember, there's an old adage, 10 years ago, way back when the dinosaurs were still alive. There used to be this notion that we hired for skills, but we terminated for behaviors, right? I think if you use a combination of skills and behaviors for selection, and you identify what are the outcomes that someone's looking for, you now have hit the trifecta. Okay, so you set up your candidate for success because they have the basic skills, they have the right behaviors, and they know what's going to be expected of them. Right? All right, so how do I make this process legal? All right, what I call the assessment legal twins are reliability and validity. I mentioned them earlier when we were talking about testing. Right, reliability is how consistent the tool is when you measure a specific thing. Okay, when I test and retest, how consistent is that measure? Skills are a little bit different there because if I test today, a typing test, I could go home and I could practice all night long and type faster tomorrow. All right, I'm not going to get supersonic faster, but I might be slightly faster than I was today. Depends on how determined I am, right? But when we talk about a behavioral assessment, the reliability should be the test should measure the same thing and produce the same results day in and day out for a specific period of time. So they're a little bit more consistent over time is a behavioral assessment. That's why you can see long-term performance indicators whenever you use a behavioral assessment, okay? Validity is referring to what characteristics the test measures and how well the test measures that characteristic. Okay, so let's talk about both of these. Reliability is indicated by the reliability coefficient. Okay, so essentially is how well does it do in a test retest situation? Okay, 0.90 and above is excellent. All right, very consistent in the way that somebody takes an assessment and gets results, right? All right, so that's a nice little table for you to have. These are all in the Department of Labor guidelines and taken directly from there. So if you have any questions around that, or you've never read the Department of Labor guidelines on assessments, there's only 13 points. It's a nice, easy read. I highly recommend it. It is a really nice guide, and it was written in 1999. Still remains consistent today. All right, validity is evidence indicating that there's a linkage, right? Is there, if I measure this specific thing, does it predict outcomes in the future? So you often hear this called a validation study. Does the thing that we're testing for predict performance later on, right? So the coefficients used for here are over on the left-hand side. So above 0.35, it's very beneficial. That means if somebody scores high on an assessment fit or on a skills test, then we know that it is going to have a correlation with some sort of outcome, right? So they do have a relationship. If there's no relationship, then one does not predict the other. And so you have an invalid testing process. Okay. Oftentimes I have, when I have a validation study that just does not work out, what happens is we test for skills and then we evaluate on performance on behaviors. And there's no correlation because we tested for skills. I tested for typing, but their performance evaluation was based on teamwork and attendance. Those are two separate things. They should not correlate, right? Okay, so we have these two things. So we want to make sure that the things that we're testing are able to predict some future performance, right? All right, so how do we fit assessments into a selection process? Ideally, I like to do custom screening, develop a custom test or assessment because it is relevant and specific. I don't test for things I don't need to test for. I don't assess them for behaviors I don't need in evaluating the individual going forward for this particular role. Okay, so I create a very configurable testing solution for the client. I have a very large retail client. We utilize assessments for their recruitment of their call centers, right? So after each recruitment, we evaluate how well the test did. And we narrow down the test questions. If a test question had no impact on helping us make a determination about a candidate, we threw it out. So we have gotten a test down from 18 questions down to 11. And it is highly predictive of training outcomes. So we're excited about being able to create that. So I encourage you to go to whatever vendor that you use and make sure that you have the right kind of assessment put together for your candidate and their experience, okay? It should only include those basic skills, only include behaviors that are appropriate, right? And I will tell you this, that process should be evaluated over time, right? Don't set it and forget it. All right, we want to make sure there's no adverse impact. We want to make sure that it is predictive and it is still relevant for the job. So we got to take a look at it at least every year. Okay, and you might only hire 5 people with it, but let's take a look at the 5 people that you did hire. How are they doing? Was that predictive of their performance? All right, so the selection process, screening applicants fairly at every stage. There shouldn't be an exception, right? If somebody needs an accommodation, that's one thing. Right? We can always accommodate, build out a test that is accommodating for a JAWS reader or build out something that doesn't contain pictures, or build out something that is not a simulation that can be done on someone's phone because that's all they have, right? We want to make sure that we are screening applicants fairly at every stage. Everyone is held to the same standard. Okay, we don't allow a candidate to retake a test because they didn't feel good about it. All right, unless you're going to allow everybody to retake the test. Right, and then conduct an analysis of our process at 90, 180 days, or 1 year. Always, always, always go back and look at your process and how it's performing. Right, if you put a process in place and you never check it, then when somebody says, hey, we're spending X number of dollars, how is that process working? You want to be able to answer the question. So make sure that whoever you're working with, whether it's an internal team or your vendor, that they are providing you with information that says, this is the process, this is how it's working, and this is the business impact. This is how much money we've saved. Okay, I took an email thread, an email notification out of a client's process, and we estimated it saved them $36,000 just taking a manual look at an email out of their process. And so the team was able to take that to their leadership and say, this process worked this well, here's the business impact, here's how much money we saved. All right, so please make sure that you're doing that, because that just builds your internal credibility by being able to put a process in place and show that it has been effective, right? Get somebody to help you with that if you have no idea what I'm talking about, okay? All right, so today's takeaways. Focus on the critical elements that drive results and success in the role, okay? Don't start using skills testing or behavioral assessments because it sounds like a good idea, right? If you are doing a beautiful job, you have no turnover, and your screening process is working for you, don't throw things in there just to throw them in, all right? If you're trying to solve a problem, or you want to improve candidate quality, or you need to increase time to product or reduce time to productivity, drive results in those ways, make sure you put a process in place that does that. Rewrite your job descriptions to focus on skills, behaviors, and outcomes, all right? Not degree requirements, if appropriate, okay? And for those of you who are DEI focused, those are the things, one of the critical things you can do with behavioral assessments is it levels that playing field, right? If you have a behavioral assessment that is race, gender, ethnicity blind, then you have evened out that playing field. So you'd be very interested to see how diverse your candidate population becomes when you only use a behavioral assessment that has that kind of validation behind it, where you can't tell just by looking at it if somebody is male or female or white or African American. I mean, you can't tell any of that. Okay, so post jobs that focus on skills, and use reliable and valid tools whenever you evaluate your candidates. And that's all I had for today. So I hope everyone enjoyed this time this morning, and maybe had a couple of good takeaways that you can take back to your role and use today. Thank you. I'll hand it over to you, Ty.
Thank you, Kelly. A lot of great info and guidance, as always. And in order to remain on schedule, we will respond to the questions that came in by chat via email in a timely manner. So with that, on behalf of HR Morning, I would also like to thank everyone for attending. This concludes our program.